Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're exploring a phenomenon that has basically completely rewired the way we think about horror and the internet, and frankly, even just the empty spaces in our own lives.
It really has.
And the timing for this couldn't be better, because today is March 3rd, 2026, which means we are literally less than 3 months away from a major Hollywood release that started as nothing more than a creepy, contextless picture on an internet message board.
Right. Which is just wild to think about.
It is wild. So our mission today is to take a massive stack of sources. We've got deep dive academic papers from the University of Central Florida, Hollywood production logs, extensive lore wikis, deep narrative analyses, and we are going to extract the absolute most important insights for you.
We are looking at the viral phenomenon known as the Backrooms.
Yes, The Backrooms, a teenage prodigy who brought it to life, and the upcoming A24 feature film. So let's unpack this, because we have an absurd amount of ground to cover. Or rather, I guess 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to navigate.
Yeah, it's an incredibly dense topic, and I think that's mostly because we are looking at how a single, entirely mundane image triggered this profound collective psychological response across the entire globe.
Right.
The Backrooms isn't just a scary story. If you actually look at the academic and cultural footprint it has left behind, it acts as a mirror. It reflects our modern anxieties about isolation, corporate architecture, and just the fragility of our digital and physical realities.
So let's take you back to the exact moment this started. Picture this. It is May 12th, 2019. An anonymous user on 4chan's paranormal board, which is known as /X, starts a thread with a very simple prompt.
They ask people to post disquieting images that just feel off.
Exactly, just feel off. And accompanying this prompt is a photograph. And if you've spent any time online in the past few years, you have absolutely seen it.
You definitely have.
It's a shot of a large empty room. The wallpaper is a sickening monochromatic mustard yellow.
It's so ugly.
So ugly. And the carpet looks old and undeniably moist. The ceiling is lined with these bright industrial fluorescent lights. And the angle of the photo is slightly tilted. It's a subtle Dutch angle that immediately makes you feel off balance just looking at it.
What is crucial to understand about that initial post, though, is that the image did not come with a story.
Right.
It was presented as a blank canvas of dread. It wasn't until the very next day that another anonymous user replied to that specific photo. And in doing so, they essentially birthed a modern internet legend.
They gave the image a name.
Yes, the Backrooms. And they wrote a short, chilling description that established the core unbending rules of this new universe.
The text of that reply is iconic at this point. They said that if you are not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms.
That word is so important. No clip.
Oh, absolutely. We will get to no-clipping in a second because it's huge. But they described the smell of old, moist carpet, the madness of the mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum humbuzz.
Maximum humbuzz. Just a great phrase.
And approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. And they ended with this absolute gut punch of a warning. They said, God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you.
That single paragraph did something structurally brilliant. It provided just enough sensory detail. The smell, the sound, the color, just enough to spark the imagination, but it left the actual mechanics of the space entirely unsaid.
Which practically demands collaboration from anyone reading it.
Exactly. And you mentioned the word no-clip, which is the foundational concept here. We all know the rush of no-clipping out of bounds in Skyrim or Mario 64, breaking the physics of the game to wander through the empty void outside the map.
Right. You glitch through a wall and suddenly you're floating in gray space.
Yes. But applying that game-breaking glitch to our physical reality is what makes the Backrooms so deeply unsettling.
It takes that incredibly familiar digital experience and weaponizes it. The academic paper we reviewed by Dae Cho and Natalie Underberg-Good from IU ScholarWorks dives heavily into this.
It's a great paper.
They point out that in a video game, no-clipping allows a player to become like a ghost, unburdened by the confines of the game designer's world limits.
But by applying this video game logic to the real world, the original 4chan poster created a terrifying existential premise.
What if our reality is just a simulation or a construct? What if you could accidentally glitch through the floor of your bedroom, bypass the collision detection of the physical universe, and end up
Out of bounds.
out of bounds,
Yeah.
behind the drywall of reality?
It is a visceral fear because it removes the concept of safety. You don't have to seek out a haunted house or read from an ancient tome to end up in the back rooms. You just have to take a wrong step.
But we have to ask, why is that specific yellow office space so terrifying? There is no blood in that picture.
No gore at all.
There is no obvious monster hiding in the shadows. It is brightly lit. Yet looking at it makes people feel incredibly deeply uneasy.
This raises a fundamental question about human psychology. The academic researchers connect the backrooms directly to the concept of liminal space.
Which is a term that gets thrown around a lot online now.
It does. Anthropologists like Victor Turner and Arnold van Gennep have long discussed liminality as a transitional state, the in-between moments of a ritual, like the transition between childhood and adulthood.
But applied to physical architecture, a liminal space is a place of transition that you are explicitly not meant to stay in.
Precisely. Like an empty airport terminal at 3 a.m., or a school hallway during summer break, or a rest stop on a lonely highway in the dead of night.
They are spaces defined entirely by movement and utility.
So when they are empty, static, and stripped of their purpose, they feel profoundly wrong to the human brain.
I remember walking through my local indoor mall during the 2020 lockdowns. I was picking up a food order from one of the few places doing takeout. All the neon signs were still on. The terrible music was still playing over the speakers. But there wasn't a single soul around, no shoppers, no kiosk workers, nothing. I felt this primal, undeniable urge to just sprint for the exit.
That fight or flight response.
Yes, my brain was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with the environment. That is exactly what this photo captures. And the sources mention a specific word for this feeling, canopsia.
Canoxia, coined by John Koenig in the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows.
It's described as the eerie, forlorn atmosphere of a place that is usually bustling with people, but is now abandoned and quiet. It's not just empty, it's hyper-empty.
It's a space where the absence of people is so loud it practically glows.
When you look at the backrooms photo, your brain tells you there should be cubicles here, there should be people typing on computers and drinking bad office coffee. The fact that there isn't anyone there is what makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
And we can trace this psychological reaction even further back to classical psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud, who was building on the earlier work of Ernst Jentsch, wrote extensively about the uncanny, or unheimlich in German, which translates literally to unhomely.
The uncanny isn't just about something being scary.
No. It is the specific psychological experience of something being simultaneously familiar and foreign. It creates a cognitive dissonance. The backrooms features elements we all recognize. Drab carpeting, generic wallpaper, harsh lighting. But they are arranged in a way that serves absolutely no logical purpose.
The walls don't enclose rooms. They just create endless, meaningless corners.
It's a recognizable environment entirely stripped of its intended utility, leaving us with a lingering sense of dread because our brain cannot categorize what it is looking at.
What's wild to me is that for years, nobody actually knew where that original photo came from. It was this massive internet mystery.
Some people thought it was completely computer-generated.
Others thought it was a photo of a random storage facility in the middle of nowhere. But just recently, the internet sleuths finally cracked the case. In May 2024, a combined effort in a dedicated Discord community used the Wayback Machine to trace the image to an archived webpage from March 2003.
And the real-world origin is remarkably mundane, which somehow makes it even more fitting for the lore. The photo was taken in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Oshkosh?
Yeah. A hobby shop chain called Hobbytown had acquired a building that used to be a furniture store called Ronner's Home Furnishings. This furniture store had been there for much of the 20th century, and it was filled with odd partitions and fake inner walls to display living room sets.
So on June 12, 2002, someone took an old Sony CyberShot camera up to the second floor, which was undergoing renovations due to extensive water damage, which completely explains the moist carpet mentioned in the creepypasta.
Right.
And they snapped a picture of what they called the East Oval Room. They uploaded it to their renovation blog with the raw file name dsc00161.jpg.
And that exact room doesn't even exist anymore.
No. The space was eventually converted into a radio-controlled car racing track called Revolution Racing. But that one snapshot from 2002 was preserved online just long enough to be grabbed, posted to 4chan in 2019, and become the foundation for an entire modern mythology.
The discovery of that photo is a perfect real-world example of what folklorists call reverse ostension. Usually a legend exists first, and then people try to act it out in the real world, like teenagers daring each other to say Bloody Mary in a dark bathroom mirror.
But here the artifact came first, the physical photograph.
Exactly. The online community reverse-engineered a massive, complex narrative to fit the eerie, uncanny feelings that the artifact produced in them. And that narrative expanded at an unprecedented rate. Over on platforms like Reddit, specifically the Backrooms subreddit, users started treating the Backrooms like a massive collaborative writing project.
But this is also where the community started to fracture, right? Because when you have millions of people collaborating on a horror concept, eventually they are going to disagree on what actually makes it scary.
Very true.
You had people constantly adding new levels. The original Yellow Rooms became known as Level 0. Then came Level 1, which was described as looking like a dark industrial parking garage. Level 2 is a claustrophobic maintenance tunnel.
Before long, there were wikis on Fandom and Wikidot detailing hundreds, even thousands of distinct levels, complete with human colonies, survival outposts, trade economies, and a whole catalog of terrifying entities.
It essentially turned into a massive crowdsourced role-playing game.
Which led to a very sharp schism in the fandom. According to an article from Vice that tracked the community's evolution, some fans loved the expansive world building. They enjoyed categorizing the monsters and treating the Backrooms like a dangerous alternate dimension to be conquered.
But others felt that adding monsters and endless varied levels entirely ruined the original psychological terror.
Yes, this purist faction even created a separate subreddit, Our True Backrooms, focusing solely on the isolation, the canopsia, and the liminality of the original Yellow Rooms, without any added monsters or extensive lore.
It highlights a fascinating tension in collaborative internet storytelling. There is always a war between the desire to constantly expand a world with new content and the desire to preserve its original enigmatic tone. If you explain the mystery, it ceases to be scary.
Exactly.
So we have this fractured, massive, slightly chaotic, crowdsourced mythos. And this brings us to the absolute turning point in the entire saga. If the 4chan post was the spark, this next event was the gasoline. Enter Kane Parsons, known online as Kane Pixels.
Kane Pixels.
So who is the mind behind the visual world that essentially took over YouTube? I'm picturing a whole writer's room of sci-fi veterans, or at least a team of seasoned VFX artists.
Actually, that is the wildest part of this entire deep dive. Kane Parsons is just a single kid. When he uploaded the video that fundamentally changed internet horror, he was 16 years old.
16?
16. He is a British-born American YouTuber born on June 18, 2005.
You have got to be kidding me. I was struggling to pass driver's ed at 16, and this kid is redefining a global horror franchise.
It is staggering. But his background is incredibly relevant here. Parsons didn't just stumble into success. He had been obsessively developing his skills for years. He started experimenting with visual effects using the level editor in the video game Little Big Planet.
Oh, wow. Little Big Planet.
By 2017, he was teaching himself Adobe After Effects, watching tutorials online to figure out how to put his ideas on screen. During the global lockdowns of 2020, he dove heavily into Blender, which is a powerful open-source 3D modeling software.
And he stated that mastering Blender gave him true creative freedom. He was already making animated shorts, like taking the anime Attack on Titan and rendering it to look like horrifying, degraded historical footage from the early 20th century.
So he already had an eye for this specific type of aesthetic.
Okay.
In late 2021, he sees the Backrooms image on his computer. He decides to make a short Blender animation inspired by it, just intending it to be a standalone piece.
On January 7, 2022, he uploaded a video titled The Backrooms Found Footage.
And the premise of that video is simple but brilliantly executed. It's presented as a raw VHS tape from 1996. We see a young filmmaker walking backwards with a camera, filming a short movie with his friends.
He suddenly trips and falls not onto the ground, but literally through the ground.
The camera cuts, and suddenly we are looking at the Backrooms in incredibly realistic three-dimensional detail. The camera movements feel organic, completely capturing the panic and disorientation of the cameraman.
The sound design in that video is a masterpiece. It perfectly captures that maddening hum buzz of the fluorescent lights that the original Creepypasta described.
The cameraman wanders for a bit, finding some strange things, like a section that looks like a poorly copied suburban home, complete with an eccentric stairway. which is actually a very clever shout-out to another famous liminal space photo online.
But then he hears a noise, he turns around, and there is a thing. The TV Tropes page describes it as a wire entity. It's tall, incredibly thin, made of what looks like black, chaotic scribbles or wires, and it emits this terrifying screeching roar that doesn't sound human or animal.
The cameraman runs, ending up in a desperate chase that eventually sees him fall down a massive chute, only to be ambushed by the entity. The camera drops, no clipping back into the real world, falling from the sky to be found later.
That specific visual style, the deliberate degradation of the video quality to look like an old, damaged VHS tape, is a hallmark of a subgenre known as analog horror.
The TV tropes analysis points out that this deliberate VHS quality serves a highly practical purpose beyond just looking cool. It obscures the special effects.
By layering static, tracking errors, chromatic aberration, and low resolution over the Blender-rendered environments, Parsons tricks the human brain into accepting the CGI as authentic physical spaces.
It bypasses our critical faculties and lands straight in the uncanny valley. You aren't looking at pristine 4K digital renders, you are looking at a degraded memory.
And it works flawlessly. The video exploded overnight. As of our current timeline in early 2026, that single video has over 71 million views.
71 million, incredible.
But Kane didn't stop there. He didn't just make a cool monster video. He had an older, unfinished story concept lying around, and he realized he could merge it with the Backrooms aesthetic. And that is how we got the A24 Foundation.
This is the moment Kane essentially rebooted the Backrooms lore. He ignored the thousands of wild Wikidot levels, the human outposts, and the trade economies, and created his own grounded sci-fi corporate thriller.
The introduction of the A24 Foundation transforms the narrative from pure, unexplainable surrealism into a dark corporate cautionary tale.
In Parsons' continuity, the Backrooms wasn't just a place you accidentally fell into because of a glitch in the universe. It was a place humanity intentionally breached. A24 is a secretive, highly government-funded research organization. In the late 1980s, they developed Project KV-31, officially known as the Low Proximity Magnetic Distortion System.
Let's break down what they actually did, because the motive is fascinating. They built a giant, brutalist metal doorway, they call it the Threshold, and they ripped a literal hole in the fabric of reality.
And why did they do it? Scientific discovery, meeting alien life.
No. Real estate.
Real estate.
A24 looked at this infinite, randomly segmented empty space and thought, hey, we can solve the global housing and commercial storage crisis. We have unlimited free square footage.
It is the ultimate critique of modern capitalism.
Exactly. Think about how modern corporations grab land, or how sterile, windowless fulfillment centers swallow up entire rural towns. The mundane corporate utility of A24's goal is so dark. They didn't see a terrifying alternate dimension. They saw an unregulated asset to be monetized. It's the ultimate modern horror. Not the monster in the dark, but the endless, unregulated greed of a faceless corporation.
But by opening the threshold, they critically destabilize the boundary between our reality and the Backrooms. The lore implies that their massive magnetic experiments actually caused the real-world 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in California.
Wow.
And worse, their continuous breaching is what started causing innocent people, like the cameraman in the first video, to accidentally no-clip into the Backrooms from random locations on Earth.
It is a classic narrative of human hubris. The scientists and executives, particularly a character named Vice Director Ivan Beck, push forward with commercializing what they call A-space, completely ignoring the mounting, undeniable evidence that this dimension is deeply hostile and dangerous.
But the executives at A24 aren't the ones paying the price for that hubris, are they?
No, it's the guys in the yellow hazmat suits doing the actual exploration. Let's look at the specific characters Kane weaves into this lore, because the tragedy is palpable. One of the absolute standout videos is called Pitfalls. It follows an A24 researcher named Marvin E. Lee. Marvin and his team are mapping the Backrooms, laying down physical tape lines so they don't get lost when they find a section where the floor is just missing. It's a massive dark pit.
This is a significant evolution in the lore. The physical layout of Parsons' Backrooms is much more dynamic than the original 4chan post. He introduces varied ceiling heights, concrete ramps, outdoor-like areas that still feel enclosed, and these dangerous pitfalls.
This adds a crucial element of verticality and physical peril to the psychological dread. You aren't just worried about monsters, you're worried about the architecture itself killing you.
So Marvin has to cross this pitfall area on a narrow ledge to explore the other side. He gets separated from his team. While he's alone, he hears a voice. a human voice crying out for help.
He naturally follows it, thinking maybe it's one of the missing persons who fell into the back rooms from the real world. He walks through a section that looks like a normal suburban street dropped in the middle of this yellow maze. He gets closer to the voice, peeks around a corner, and realizes it's not a human.
Marvin has this incredible visceral moment of sheer panic where he whispers, "That's not a person. That is not a frickin' person."
That moment is a masterclass in tension. The entity is utilizing voice mimicry to lure prey. This introduces a predatory intelligence to the entities, making them significantly more terrifying than mindless roaming monsters.
Marvin manages to run back and barely escape across the pitfall, but he is deeply traumatized. And the lore only gets darker when we look at the video's autopsy report and found footage number 2.
Yes, because the ultimate question is, where do these monsters actually come from? Are they native to this dimension? In Autopsy Report, A24 researchers find the corpse of a missing person pressed up against a wall, completely covered in a strange mold-like substance.
An autopsy reveals that the body has been overtaken by a mutant strain of Bacillus.
Which requires some context. Bacillus, or Bacillus subtilis, is a real-world soil bacteria. It is the kind of mundane thing you find in everyday dirt.
But in the environment of the backrooms, it mutates into a biological nightmare.
It grounds the horror in reality. The later videos heavily imply that the terrifying wire-like bacteria monsters aren't aliens at all. They are actually the mutated horrific remains of the innocent people who no-clipped, got trapped, and starved to death in the backrooms.
The environment literally digests them, breaks them down, and turns them into its own antibodies to hunt other humans.
It is pure, unrelenting body horror. The backrooms acts like a giant digestive tract.
The tragedy of the individual in the face of an uncaring bureaucracy in a hostile environment is the central theme in Parsons' work. And this is most acutely felt in the story of Peter Tench.
Ooh, Peter.
In the informational video, Peter is operating a camera for a routine ACE-YNC expedition. He gets separated from his group, wanders around the yellow maze, and eventually finds his way back to the threshold doorway.
Yeah.
But when he enters, alarms start blaring, and the staff react as if there has been a massive security breach.
We find out later, in a video called Presentation, that Peter didn't just get lost in physical space, he got lost in time. The backrooms possesses massive time anomalies. Peter thought he wandered for maybe a few hours, but in the real world, he jumped 2 entire months into the future.
And this creates a massive problem for ACE-YNC, because when Peter disappeared, they assumed he was dead. And they absolutely did not want the government or the media looking into their highly classified, highly dangerous project.
So what did they do? They faked a car crash. They told Peter's family he died in a tragic accident and held a closed casket funeral.
So when Peter suddenly reappears alive 2 months later, ACE-YNC has a profound PR and legal nightmare on their hands. This initiates a complex Rashomon-style narrative across subsequent videos.
In the video reunion, another researcher, Mark Bloom, encounters Peter surviving out in the backrooms. Peter is armed with a shotgun he managed to steal, and he is frantic, unkempt, and terrified.
He claims that ACE-YNC threw him back into the labyrinth to die, so they wouldn't have to explain his resurrection to his family and the authorities. Peter ends up shooting Mark in a panic and fleeing deeper into the maze.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here. Is it entirely impossible that Peter did just lose his mind? Sensory deprivation in a place like the backrooms, you'd start hallucinating in hours, let alone if you're kept in isolation. Maybe ACE-YNC is actually telling the truth.
It's a fair question.
Because ACE-YNC releases a video called Damage Control for their employees. In this version of events, they claim they were trying to help Peter. They say they kept him in medical isolation while they figured out how to reintegrate him into society without causing a media frenzy.
Right.
They claim Peter suffered a complete mental breakdown, suffered from intense paranoia, stole a gun, and ran back into the backrooms entirely on his own because he thought it was a trap. They say he eventually managed to escape the facility entirely, but fell, hit his head on a rock outside, and died. Why jump to a massive corporate assassination plot?
Because the brilliance of damage control is how inherently untrustworthy it is constructed to be. The TV tropes analysis highlights that viewers are given brief subliminal glimpses of security footage showing a mysterious figure out in public, suggesting Peter actually did escape into the city and ACE-YNC is covering that up.
I see.
Furthermore, ACE-YNC's insistence that a highly trained researcher who survived the backrooms simply tripped on a rock and died is a classic gas leak cover-up trope. It's too neat, too convenient. The audience is left to debate the reality. Did A24 ruthlessly throw an employee to the monsters to protect their funding, or did the isolation of the backrooms drive Peter to fatal paranoia?
Both possibilities are deeply unsettling. But given A24's track record of causing earthquakes and hiding missing persons, the corporate assassination theory holds heavy narrative weight.
It's a masterfully woven narrative.
But I want to take a moment to look at why this specific type of horror resonated so massively when it did. The original post was in 2019, but Kane's video dropped in January 2022. We were all dealing with the lingering fallout, the isolation, and the weird reality of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes. The academic paper from the University of Central Florida draws a very straight line between the backrooms and pandemic anxieties.
The researchers, Cho and Underberg Good, argue that the backrooms served as a virtual legend trip during the COVID era. Let's break that down. What exactly is a legend trip in this context?
A legend trip is a well-documented folkloric practice where people, usually teenagers or young adults, visit a supposedly haunted or dangerous physical site, like an abandoned asylum, a graveyard, or a crybaby bridge, to test their courage and experience something supernatural. It's a rite of passage.
But during quarantine, physical legend tripping was entirely impossible. You couldn't leave your house. So youth culture retreated to cyberspace to fulfill that psychological need.
And the desolation of the backrooms perfectly mirrored the desolation of formerly bustling public spaces during the pandemic. We were all caught in this weird alienated state. The backrooms became a collaborative outlet for collective grief and anxiety.
When you watched a video of someone wandering alone through endless decaying corporate hallways, trying to survive a hostile, invisible threat, it felt incredibly relatable to what the world was actually going through with a novel airborne virus. The horror wasn't a vampire or a werewolf. The horror was isolation and an invisible threat in a sterile environment.
And we must also acknowledge how the backrooms fit into the broader historical genre of glitch horror or haunted games. The academic paper mentions legacy internet legends like the Lavender Town Syndrome from the early Pokemon games, or the Ben drowned creepypasta involving a supposedly haunted Majora's Mask cartridge.
Those stories prey on the anxiety that our technology, which we rely on completely, is fallible and potentially malicious. The generation that grew up playing Super Mario 64 or Skyrim, who spent hours trying to glitch through walls just to see the empty void behind the game map, were perfectly primed to accept a horror story where reality itself has a glitch.
We trust the physical world to be solid. The Backrooms takes the inherent uncanniness of a broken video game and maps it onto physical reality. It asks, what if the universe was programmed by a lazy developer who left empty, unrendered rooms just outside your field of vision?
Exactly. And now we see this concept making the ultimate leap from niche internet subculture to mainstream prestige media. We are sitting here in March 2026, and Kane Parsons isn't just a YouTuber making Blender animations in his bedroom anymore. He is a Hollywood director. At 19 years old, he became the youngest director in the history of A24.
I still can't wrap my head around that. A24 is the studio behind the most critically acclaimed prestige horror of the last decade. Movies like Hereditary, Midsommar, and Talk to Me. And they handed the reins of a major multi-million-dollar feature film to a teenager who taught himself visual effects by watching YouTube tutorials during COVID.
The trajectory is truly unprecedented in the history of cinema.
The film, officially titled Backrooms, is scheduled for theatrical release on May 29, 2026. Looking at the production details from our sources, including casting grids from Production Weekly, the project was operating under the working title Effigy when it shot in Vancouver during the summer of 2025.
And the producing team includes absolute heavyweights in the genre. You have Sean Levy's 21 Laps Entertainment, the production team behind Stranger Things, and James Wan's Atomic Monster, who basically defined modern studio horror with the Conjuring universe.
That cast is incredible. We've got Academy Award nominee Chiwetel Ejiofor and Renate Reinsve, who is absolutely phenomenal in The Worst Person in the World.
But what really strikes me is the plot synopsis we have. It says, after her patient disappears into a strange dimension beyond reality, a therapist is forced to brave the unknown in order to bring him back alive.
It is a brilliant way to adapt the lore.
But does it stray too far from the roots? The whole point of the original videos is the found footage of a random person running from a monster format. By giving it a traditional narrative structure with a therapist, do we lose the mystery?
I would argue it's a necessary evolution for a feature-length film. You cannot sustain a 2-hour theatrical experience on just wandering and running. By focusing on a therapist, the film can delve deeply into the psychological toll of the liminal space.
That makes sense.
It allows the narrative to play with Freud's concepts of the uncanny and the madness induced by sensory deprivation and isolation that we saw with characters like Peter Tench in the web series. It provides a grounded emotional core, a professional trying to save a vulnerable person, while forcing a normal logical mind to confront the mind-bending illogical architecture of the backrooms. It shifts the horror from just physical survival to psychological survival.
I see where you're going with that. If the therapist is trying to apply logic to a space that defies physics, the psychological breakdown will be terrifying to watch. I am genuinely counting down the days until May 29th.
Me too.
But it's also worth noting that Kane hasn't just been sitting around waiting for the movie to come out. His broader portfolio proves he is absolutely not a one-hit wonder, because while The Backrooms was in pre-production, he kept creating. In 2023, he launched an entirely separate web series called The Oldest View.
And The Oldest View taps into a similar vein of liminal horror, but executes it with a completely different aesthetic. He took an image he found of a giant, genuinely terrifying papier-mâché roll-on puppet based on a real historical figure, the botanist Julian Reverchon, and built an entire mystery thriller around it.
The series involves a YouTuber discovering an impossible, seemingly endless underground mall hidden deep beneath a forest.
The aesthetics of that underground mall in The Oldest View trigger a fear that is similar to the Backrooms, but distinct. The Backrooms is corporate office space. The underground mall is consumerism frozen in time. And the way that Rolling Giant pursues the protagonist, moving only when you aren't looking, or sometimes aggressively charging down a dark corridor, is absolute nightmare fuel.
And more recently, in January 2025, he debuted another project called People Still Live Here. This is a digital horror series revolving around a retro video game that supposedly retells events documented between 1934 and 1946 by a character named Clifton J. Saywell in a bizarre dimension called the Meadow.
What is truly remarkable about Parsons is his understanding of multimedia world building. He is a prolific musician, composing the original scores for all his projects. He released a full ambient album for People Still Live Here over a year before the visual series even began. His ability to build cross-platform narrative universes is highly sophisticated for any creator, let alone someone his age.
The cultural impact of what Kane started is just massive. The Backrooms aesthetic has bled into every corner of pop culture. There was even an episode of American Horror Stories, the Hulu spin-off of American Horror Story, that was directly inspired by the Backrooms. It starred Michael Imperioli as a grief-stricken screenwriter who begins falling into mundane, empty locations to confront a manifestation of his missing son.
And we cannot overstate the impact on the indie gaming scene. Following the original Creepypasta and Kane's videos, developers flooded platforms like Steam and Roblox with interactive adaptations. We saw games like The Backrooms Game by Pi on a Play Productions, the incredibly popular co-op multiplayer Escape the Backrooms, the found-footage-style survival game The Backrooms 1998, and upcoming psychological horror titles constructed in Unreal Engine 5 like Dreamcore.
The interactive medium is a perfect home for this lore. It allows players to experience the profound powerlessness and alienation of the liminal space firsthand, turning passive anxiety into active participatory survival horror.
It is an entire cottage industry built on yellow wallpaper and buzzing lights. We have covered the origins on a random 4chan board, the deep psychological roots of why empty spaces and canopsia terrify us, the incredible corporate thriller lore expansion by Kane Pixels and the ACE-YNC Foundation, the tragic tales of Marvin and Peter Tench, and the upcoming A24 blockbuster.
It is a testament to how the internet can organically grow a single weird feeling into a global media franchise.
If we take a step back and view this entire phenomenon through a macro lens, The Backrooms represents a fundamental shift in modern folklore. We are no longer just telling ghost stories around a campfire or passing down urban legends through word of mouth. We are collaboratively generating complex, interactive digital realities that express our deepest modern anxieties about technology, isolation, and the spaces we inhabit.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. The academic paper we discussed touches on how the modern world itself seems to persist in a permanent state of liminality. We live our lives in constant transition, scrolling through endless social media feeds, jumping between browser tabs, existing in the nebulous cloud.
Think about the architecture of the internet itself.
Right. It is an endless labyrinth of dead links, forgotten MySpace pages, abandoned forums, and archived websites sitting on servers in dark humming data centers. You don't have to physically no-clip through the floor to get lost. Every time you log online and wander into the forgotten abandoned corners of the web, aren't you, in a way, already walking through the backrooms?
A chilling thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Stay curious and watch your step.